Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and we are joined today by three of the finest contributors to ACSOM for the Rangers game, the Glasgow derby. And to my right is Anthony Haggerty. Welcome to the show, Anthony. How are you?
Very well, yourself? Pleased to be
Great.
here.
It's great to see you. Just underneath me here is JP Mason. JP, an absolute pleasure to have you back on. And bottom right is Lawrence Connolly. And we're here, obviously, to give you the pre-match. A lot of people are unimpressed with the kind of pre-match you get on the mainstream. Lawrence has already made his comments known. I don't know if he'll delve into that as we get chatting. The team lines, first and foremost. It was a team that, to be honest, I had predicted that during the week. I think the only question mark, Lawrence Connolly, was around who would partner Eddie. And I don't mean partner in terms of El Yunusi playing as a striker as such. He'll just be playing off Eddie, I would expect. But I think that was really the only question mark. Do you play Moy or do you play Griffiths? Is there any other surprises in there for you?
Nah, not for me. I think it's, you're going with what you've got. Taylor's coming back from injury. Maybe I said Taylor lets out, but it's not a surprise that Diego starts in front of him, given that Taylor's been out injured. So yeah, I don't see any. I can't see Griff's so far out of the picture just now. I can't see him. Couldn't see him start.
He is. Now, JP, when you look at the Celtic lineup and you look at how we've performed this season, that team there, it's strong. It's a strong Celtic side. There's no getting away from it. But they've completely underperformed. Do we have enough when you look at that side up against the now champions Rangers to get a result today?
Well, I think if you look at how they played, that's that same team that played at Dundee United, and everybody was quite optimistic at half time. I don't remember anybody, sort of throwing the towel in that game at half time. Most people were kind of saying, "Oh, we're playing well." I've seen encouraging signs. All we didn't do was score. So you'd like to think if that team can play the way they did in the first half against Dundee United, that they could carve a more clear-cut opportunity that actually would result in a goal. And then where that takes us from there, it's then up to us to manage the game at that point and not capitulate as we have done on so many occasions.
Yeah, and we have done all season, really. JP, I'm going to come over to my good pal, Tony Haggerty, and there's been a lot of talk over the last few weeks about games like this where the league championship has already been won as being dead rubbers. What's your thoughts on a Celtic Rangers game being referred to as a dead rubber?
Strap yourself in. All right, I'm going to say something here. I wrote 3 words down last night. I wrote any given Sunday. And anybody that knows their films will know there's a speech in that by Al Pacino. And I quote here, "You only learn that when you start losing stuff, you find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw with our fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the difference between winning and losing. In any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. You've got to look at the guy next to you, look into his eyes. You're going to see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're going to see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're going to do the same for him. That's a team, and either we heal now as a team or we will die as individuals. That's football, guys. That's all it is. Now, what are you going to do? Well, I'll tell you what the Celtic players should do today. Play with pride for that jersey, play with pride for that crest, and play with pride for this club, and play with pride for this cause. But see, most importantly of all, there's 50,000 people that would have been crammed into that ground today that would have cheered them to the rafters, despite the fact that the season has been terrible. Tommy Burns famously said, "You don't play for Celtic, you live for Celtic." We can't play for Celtic, but we live for Celtic. So on this given Sunday, I implore the players today, don't play for Celtic today, live for Celtic. And if it means that much to them as it does to us today, then we'll preserve that invincible record that means so much to us all. There you go.
Hit the applause button.
Absolutely. We're talking about...
That's why it's not a dead rubber.
Absolutely. Yeah, beautifully put, Tony. Lawrence Connolly, pride. We were speaking just about a month ago about professional pride. It's all about that today, isn't it, Tony? Encapsulating the feelings of many Celtic fans there.
Yeah, it's our new side rivals are coming here as champions. So you hope that the players, our players are hurting at losing the title. There's players there that weren't part of the true invincible domestic season that won't want to see a team come close to that way, invincible league season. So, yeah, 100%, Tony. It's pride. It's more than that. It should be played for life here. It should mean that much to them. And I think perhaps the worry is that it hasn't meant that much to them all season. It should really mean that anytime you cross the white line when they're getting white hoops, but we've not seen that commitment to the cause.
That's been a big frustration this season. And what's happened, JP, all season, I mean, we were going to be going live on a daily basis anyway. It was always part of the plan. It was just so that we were going into this historic season at the time that we were ready and set up to go live on a daily basis as the ACSOM Bulletin, covering every game. It didn't quite go as we had hoped. And during the period of the campaign, various ACSOM contributors at different times realised that this wasn't happening and change was required. They were called, entitled. They were told that they were overreacting, spoiled, throwing the toys at the pram because we weren't winning every week. And that's the kind of thing that we were accused of as a Celtic fan base. I spoke to someone fairly recently who basically said that all the podcasts all just turned into an echo chamber. But I don't agree with that. I don't buy it for a second. I think there's a lot of people who are in the Neil Lennon or Peter Lawwell camp and who might be very close to these people, who are scared to criticise them. And there was always this default position that you're spoiled. You don't know what it's like to watch a failing Celtic side or a Celtic side that has never lost, which I think in the case of everybody on the show today is an absolute nonsense because we're all old enough to remember that. But JP, it all came home to roost. It all came home to roost and all the warning signs were ignored. And we now find ourselves in March, in the middle of March, just, the dead rubber comments have been blown out the water by Anthony Haggerty, and rightly so. But we shouldn't be in this position, should we?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think anybody that was kind of hanging back and criticising the manager was probably doing so out of loyalty, myself included. I was kind of going, we could still get on, something could still happen here, something could still change, but it was just, it gathered too much momentum going in the wrong direction. And it's just been, it has been an unmitigated disaster. It's bizarre actually to be in this situation. I still can't really get my head around it because it's so alien to where we were. You could take losing a title in a close race or whatever, but to fall this far is just no. I don't think anybody's ever seen this in Celtic's history, to go from such a period up here to mediocrity in the space of a year. Has that ever happened before? Surely not. No,
absolutely not. And, a big shout out actually to ACSOM contributor Natasha, who was on Football Focus yesterday morning. And I thought she was excellent, the way she put across her points. But interestingly enough, it was Connie McLaughlin who was presenting the show. And she was talking about the level of domination at Celtic. Just going on to, expanding on your point there, JP, the level of domination that Celtic had enjoyed leading into this season, 9 in a row. She says a treble 4 years running, because we get a habit of saying a quadruple treble. And then she said a treble 4 years running. You're thinking 4 years of nobody laying a glove on us. And then to this level, JP, you're right. It's not as though, like the Wim Jansen season, we've been battling to the last kick of the ball and eventually, one or the other wins the league. And we'd seen that so often when Celtic were losing on the last day of the season under Martin O'Neill a couple of times, where it was just like, it could have just turned. It could have turned. I mean, there's a helicopter waiting to actually bring the trophy, and it sways from side to side. It's not been like that this season. But surely, Anthony, as Celtic supporters with a platform that we've built up over a period of almost 4 years, we were entitled all season to say this isn't good enough. And regardless of how much he had committed and devoted to Celtic, we were right to actually try and affect change and try and have that influence and say Neil Lennon has to go. Many people are of the same view about people above him. The changes have started, Anthony Haggerty. How big will the changes need to be? I just need to look at that lineup. and I did that this season, earlier on this week rather, how many of those players starting for Celtic today will be here on the first day of next season?
We looked at it a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? Might have been the Dundee United game, and we said there was about half a team. I think there was 5 that we picked out in the starting line that we thought might be there. The rest would be gone. And the changes are going to have to be pretty massive. You know that, and there is nothing wrong with ACSOM shining a light on where it's gone wrong for Celtic this season. But we did it consistently. We were never personal. We were with our criticism. We just called it out as we were going along at every conceivable opportunity, because for a team who were allegedly supposed to be going for 10 in a row, it wasn't good enough from very early. And so you called that from very early. You didn't take any pleasure and pride in calling it, because everybody wanted 10 in a row. Well, certainly everybody amongst the supporters. The decline and the disconnect we've spoken about before, but it has been so unreal. It's all surreal, almost, for it all to just collapse the way it has in a matter of months. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying that. We've spoken before, it was never personal. We tried to affect change because what we were witnessing happening with our football club wasn't good enough. And people paid a lot of money. That I just cannot stress that fact, not to see football. But they were given the assurances and promises at Celtic were tooling up, I keep using the phrase, tooling up for 10 in a row, and they did anything but. So the changes that you're going to see now are going to have to be massive, and it's all because there was no forward planning. They were talking about domestic dominance. That was their yardstick, domestic dominance, but there was no forward planning to take us forward. They just wanted to get to this magical figure in the ether and then pat themselves on the back and say, a job well done. No, they didn't achieve it, and it's not a job well done. And now they have to piece it all back together again. And a lot of the supporters don't feel confident in those at the top being able to do that.
This is a big thing. Going back to what you said earlier, JP, that level of capitulation, we've heard that word, and I think it perfectly demonstrates exactly what happened to Celtic. I don't think it has ever been seen. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the comments, and welcome to everybody watching this on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. Please, correct me if I'm wrong, but this wasn't something that went wrong due to one bad transfer window pre-season. That became pretty clear. It was much deeper than that, wasn't it? I mean, yes, we have gone on and on about this culture comment that Neil Lennon made. There certainly has been an issue with the culture of Celtic and the team all season. I've been making the point, though, JP, that the level of transition, the amount of change that we're going to go into, it's going to be a transformation from top to bottom. We've heard all the chat about all the different names that have been thrown into the hat, and I think we've discussed them all really in depth, JP. I mean, we even got Mark Hughes and Mark Bowen on the show to talk to them about their managerial philosophy going forward. And, we approached Ralph Rangnick, who actually got back to us personally, and sent us an email. And, he politely refused the request to come onto a Celtic State of Mind because he was too busy. But we asked the question, JP, because we're looking at this situation where it's not just about, let's get a manager in. We know it's deeper than that. And there's been a lot of chat about the fact that it may be Fergal Harkin. There's reports that it's 90% done. I myself, through a very reliable source, have heard that the level of investment that's going to go into Celtic, both in the coaching aspect and the playing staff, this summer is going to be huge. I mean, we're going to throw everything at this pre-season. But my biggest concern, JP, because it wasn't just a bad transfer window, it wasn't just a few players losing a bit of form, it seemed a lot deeper than that. Do you think we can turn it round between now and the first kick of the ball next season?
I mean, that's a big ask, isn't it, to go from where we are right now, which seems like a kind of rudderless ship, and you're asking somebody to come in and plot the coordinates and then set sail and get there. Who knows? I'd like to think that we can. I'd like to think that, as I said before, when the club put out that tweet that kind of was maybe trying to get the fans back on side. I said at the time they better be backing that up if they're going to put something like that out. That is a bit of a rallying call. Then they better have something up their sleeve to back it up, because it can't just become hollow words. And anything that Celtic do now has to be backed up, with hard evidence of, here's the money we've spent, this is what it's going to do, and this is what it's going to do going forward, rather than us constantly just burning money on players from here, there and everywhere that come in and are, loaned out. I mean, like O'Connell going out yesterday, and it's quite sad. I was quite sad to see that's where he's gone. I no disrespect to Queen's Park. I know they're planning something quite big there, as you said. But it's why has he not been given a chance at Celtic? Why did we go to the effort to sign him?
I'll tell you why, JP. It comes right down to 10 in a row. It really does. And that's why we're falling off the edge of a cliff so spectacularly this season, because all those other things that you're talking about, having the raft of players of the age of Luke O'Connell, be that a player that you brought through since the age of 8 or someone you bought in from Bolton Wanderers, we didn't have them prepared for the challenge should they be required. The only person that's come through of that, I would suggest, of that ilk this season is Welsh, and he was thrown in ironically enough against Rangers in a game that I watched with Lawrence Conley at the beginning of the season, where things were starting to become pretty clear that there were issues at Celtic. But you're absolutely right, JP, it is disappointing that someone like Connell would go, and I think it's a good point actually to raise. Colin Watt and I did a show last weekend because there was no football. We came on a Saturday, we looked at the entire squad, and if you were being completely brutal about it, there were 18 names in the first team squad that could leave this summer. Now, some of those names were perhaps young guys who you were thinking they might leave on a loan deal, but there was 18 departures potentially, and one of them on my list was Luke O'Connell, because I just felt that he was in a situation where he's not playing any football whatsoever. And any footballer will tell you that the best example I ever got was from the dearly departed Graham Morrison, who's at Celtic for many, many years in the 1990s. And he said that when you have that ascendancy and the momentum, you need to continually go uphill. He says it's uphill and you're going. He says, so if you imagine driving uphill and then there comes a point where you've got to stop and put the handbrake on, and how difficult it is to just get right back into the groove and go again. And I thought about that when Luke O'Connell went to Queen's Park. Now, as you say, JP, Queen's Park are hugely ambitious. They've got people in there. Sir William Hawkey, of Lord William Hawkey. Sorry, Willie, if you're watching. He obviously is involved at Queen's Park. There's been huge changes going from amateur to professional. They're moving from Hampden to Lesser Hampden. They're full-time. At that level of Scottish football, they're paying their management team and their players full-time wages. They're buying players who could probably get a club in the Championship. Ray McKinnon's in charge. He's managed at a higher level. And they've brought in a couple of players from Celtic. Now, we had a wee chat on the WhatsApp group yesterday all about it, because Colin predicted, and he won't mind me saying this, he predicted that Luke O'Connell will still play for Celtic one day. And you know what? I hope he does. But I brought up the point that a similar move was offered to Karamoko Dembele earlier this season, whereby it was a choice of you play football or you basically sit and rot, because let's think about the inertia that kicks into a young player who's maybe 17, 18-year-old, who's not playing games, Tony, for 6 months, sometimes not playing a competitive game of football. Go out and get some game time in your legs, and Dembele refused because he looked at that move as being below him. Because he thinks that he's going to leave Celtic and go into greater things, and we're all going to be raving about him as a Champions League player at some time in the future. And if he does, fair play to him. But I think that we need to give a bit of praise to Connell for accepting that challenge, because he's looked at that and he's thought, I'm going to get some game time here, which is better than sitting in your flat watching the games on a Saturday, surely. Surely it's better for the player. And I use some of the examples, guys who used Queen's Park, maybe after disappointments at other clubs. Shankland, who's doing really well with Dundee United. If you look at his record, it will tell you that he was a Queen's Park youth, but he was at Heart and Midlothian before then, and Hearts had released him. And he goes to Queen's Park, he builds himself up, and he makes a name for himself, and he gets his move. Andy Robertson's the famous one. You know, he'd been booted out of Celtic, released from Celtic. Instead of, you know, just forgetting about football and playing with his mates at the weekend, he went to Queen's Park, he built himself up, he moved on. Further back, I used the examples of Simon Donnelly, Malcolm Mackay. There's loads of players who have done it at Queen's Park. So fair play to Luke O'Connell, but I totally agree with you, JP, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Tony. It's been complete mismanagement on every level underneath those 11 players that are playing on a weekend, on a match day.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I said it on Friday. I'm not disputing that Luke O'Connell's... I said that Luke O'Connell was going to go out and the best thing he's going to get was games and game time. You know, we're talking about a level, you know, but who's made this decision to send him to Queen's Park? Surely they could send him to another Premiership club and he could play at the standard and not play against Celtic. You know, we had with Ryan Christie who went to Aberdeen. You know, this guy's going to play in the Scottish Premiership if he does well at Queen's Park, maybe or maybe not. So why not loan him to a fellow Premiership team so he knows the standard and he knows the terrain and he gets to know where he's playing in the grounds and stuff like that. You know, I don't know who's made this decision to send him to Queen's Park. The boy did well to accept it at Queen's Park, and he had an interview yesterday which was posted online, and he said he was just happy to be playing football again. Now, if somebody at Celtic hears it, why is he not getting his chance at Celtic? The guy's desperate to play football. And from all intents and purposes, from the little snippets that we've seen, he actually can play football. So where is the management there? Where is the coaching? What happened? Has Luke O'Connell regressed that badly? That he's not a footballer? I beg to differ. These guys should get their chance, and they should get their chance even more so now, after today possibly.
Yeah.
If Celtic win, there's about 5 or 6 games left, and they should have got their chance then. Show that they've got ability. And I think Luke O'Connell's a player. I said it on Friday that he's had a raw deal, and I used that trumpet expression, you know what I mean? But yeah, it was fair enough. He's got a legitimate case. Karamoko Dembele might be different. That might be an attitude thing with Karamoko Dembele, you know, and people talk about Islam Farouz as well, kind of comparing the two. So that's fair enough. If they don't want to take a move like that, so be it. So the one thing I can say about Luke O'Connell is fair play to him for accepting it, but I think Luke O'Connell should be playing at a higher level of a loan deal. That's just my own opinion.
I remember the subject was brought up earlier, Tony, earlier this season, where Celtic have been carrying a huge squad. You know, it's you know, we've had players under the circumstances who have not been playing games, and it was said that in January, why not get a couple of players out to Hibs, Dundee United, Aberdeen, should those teams wish to take them on, of course, because we have got a huge squad of players, often international players. I'm going to bring one up in a second or two, who are not going to be playing for Celtic. So what you're doing is you're strengthening the opposition, but obviously you always have that caveat of the fact that they don't play against Celtic, so you're strengthening other teams in the league. When it comes to the young players, you look at some of the loan deals that have gone well for us, Ryan Christie, Chris Ayer. You're absolutely right, Tony. They've gone to the same level. So they've gone to Kilmarnock, they've gone to Aberdeen. They know the league that they're going to be playing in when they come back to Celtic. They've adapted, they've matured, physically they've bulked up, come back to Celtic and they're first team players.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean,
it makes perfect sense.
You know, it makes perfect sense.
And it's like part of a plan as well. It's part of a plan as well, rather than just a reactionary, oh, well, we'll just send them out and look like. I mean, it's not even January, do you know what I mean? It's the middle of March and we've decided to send a player out on loan. I mean, I know the league's started and all that, but even still, it doesn't seem like that was worked into his plan. I don't think.
Big thing here, I'm going to throw this one over to Lawrence because he's sitting there patiently waiting for me to ask him. Just a few minutes ago, Lawrence, the odds came up, obviously, on the next Celtic manager. It's all names on that list that we've spoken about on a Celtic State of Mind, and the favourite, as far as Sky Sports were concerned, is still John Kennedy. But an outside bet was Martin O'Neill. Now, Martin's on there. I can't hear what he's saying. But obviously, he's been touted by some quarters as being a potential director of football or even a manager. I agree with Ian McIntosh. I think he's way out of touch, not only as a manager, but even some of the comments he makes when he's talking as a pundit. I don't think he would come in and be of any benefit to Celtic at this stage.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I heard them before we went live. I had pre-match on, and we're talking about the racism that Glenn Kamara faced, and Ramon was asked, can you recall when you were managing, facing a similar situation? And he said nothing sprang to mind. I mean, as soon as he was asked the question, I thought, he's Lenny at Ibrox getting 90 minutes of racial abuse. But nothing sprang to Martin's mind. And I thought, you either call out or you don't. It's, I thought, here's an opportunity probably to grab the headlines and call out again and say, right, yeah, it goes on all the time in Scotland. What are we going to do about it? But, nothing sprang to mind. And I thought, Martin, a bit disappointed in that. I don't know if he's genuinely forgotten it or if it's a pre-arranged question from the cameras and only certain answers are allowed.
It is disappointing because you think back to the iconic image of O'Neill going on to embrace Neil Lennon at Ibrox. And, and you think to yourself, JP, well, now is the opportunity to say, well, yeah, there is an issue every single day in Scottish society. And Neil Lennon was the biggest victim of that, in my mind, at Celtic over the last 10, 20 years. So it was an opportunity. But in terms of a manager or a director of football, our direction has to be completely different from Martin O'Neill, who I think his buddy Roy Keane would then be coming into the frame. And for me, that's not the direction Celtic need to be taking, particularly, JP, when you look at the rebuilding job that's required now. I'm going to ask, great point by Anthony Haggerty earlier on, saying that, win this game, give some of the young boys game time. You're looking at Henderson, for example, who I thought performed pretty well against Lille, and he's disappeared, and bring in a few of the other young guys who need that kind of experience. But I'm also looking at the £10 million investment in Barkas and Ajeti, and I noticed that Ajeti isn't on the bench. Can anyone clarify, has he picked up an injury or has he actually dropped from the 20-man squad? Has he dropped out? Because that's a concern for me. Let's give the guys, like Tony says, half a dozen games, Scottish Cup games, and assess them. Are they going to be part of the rebuild? Are we going to get at least one of these investments paying the transfer fee back? Because I think of the two, Barkas, I'm not holding out too much hope for him, JP, but we've seen enough in Ajeti in the early games to suggest that he could be a player for Celtic.
We did, but he did have an entire season at West Ham where he didn't really do anything, which is becoming eerily reminiscent now at Celtic, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what went on at West Ham. I can't comment on that, but we don't know what's going on at Celtic either. So, I mean, the guy, we've invested heavily in him. If you go back to the 90s and stuff like that, or even the early noughties, spending £5 million on a player was a big deal for Celtic. It shouldn't be seen now as just being like, oh well, that's just like a £1 million player like 20 years ago. It's not. It's £5 million, and you want to see a return on that. So it'll be up to the new manager to come in and assess whether or not he thinks he's got what it takes to be a Celtic player.
Now, the teams are on the pitch. I'm going to run round and try and get some predictions from you. JP, I'll come at you first of all. What's your prediction for today?
I said 1-1, and I think that was just me being optimistic rather than gung-ho. So, yeah, I'm going to say 1-1. You're
going to stick to the 1-1. Anthony, how do you see it going today?
I'll take Celtic to win 2-0.
Free scoring, rip roaring. Yeah. And Lawrence Connolly, what's your prediction for the day, pal?
Well, I got part of it right on Tuesday. They were not given the Guard of Honour. I didn't see what buses they turned up in. But I'm still going to stick with 1-0. The ref giving us a penalty and sending off a Rangers player.
Oh. Brilliant. It's a pivotal day if that happens.
I hope you put your money where your mouth is in that, Lawrence, because that's a nifty bet.
That is a bet and a half. Now, we'll join the action. We'll be back at half-time. Enjoy the game, guys, and thank you, everybody, for joining us on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you at half-time.